All right. All right, so welcome and good afternoon. As folks know on this call, this is a monthly meeting for those who are engaged in post-conviction work, either prosecutors or innocence organizations, for training programs. This particular webinar series is sponsored by a grant from the Bureau of Justice Administration, which is part of the Office of Justice Programs in the U.S. Department of Justice, which allows the Quattrone Center to provide technical training and assistance to grantees under the Preventing Wrongful Convictions and Upholding the Rule of Law grants. But we were able to expand this to really anybody in this field because of the grant itself. And this month, I'm just very, very grateful and just beyond words grateful to welcome three folks from the Innocence Project. As most of you know, the Innocence Project has been in existence since, if I'm not mistaken, 1992, working with individuals who were wrongly convicted, particularly using DNA. But because of the success of the organization over the years, they have expanded their social work department in particular to work with returning citizens to help ensure that as they come back into society, they are supported and that they have access to the very, very real programs that they need in order to try to get their life back on track, having had so many years taken from them. So I'm very happy to welcome Susie, Colin, and Kayana from the Social Work Department of the Innocence Project. For those of you who have questions, again, please feel free to put them in the chat for them, but I'm going to go ahead and hand off to Susie and hopefully try to highlight everybody for those on the call. So welcome, Susie, Colin, Kayana. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having us. We're excited to be here. We are a small but mighty team, and actually two people aren't able to be with us today. But like was mentioned, my name is Susie Salami. I'm the Director of Social Work at the Innocence Project, and I'm here with my two colleagues. I'll just let Kayana and Colin just introduce themselves quickly.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kayana Champion. I am a social worker here at IP, and I've been at IP since November of 2020. And I'll pass it to Colin.
Hi, everyone. My name is Colin Jackson. I am also a social worker here at the Innocence Project. I started in September of 2022 as an intern through the Masters of Social Work program through Rutgers. And now through multiple contracts, I am here as a full-time social worker.
Great. I'm just going to share my screen now for the PowerPoint. Bear with us as we do all this technological stuff. View slideshow. Okay, so everyone can see, I'm assuming. These are the goals for today. So we're going to provide some intro to the social work department. We have a little bit, specific work that we do that's based on how long we've been around, how much of a budget we have, and it's different than a lot of people in the network. So I want to explore that and give some information that might help people who are trying to build out a social work program. Some general trauma education. We have some scenarios and role playing. Although we won't really do the role playing, we'll just talk about scenarios, and that's going to be done with breakout rooms and some jam boards. So it's going to get really exciting very soon. We're also going to talk about boundaries, and we're going to have time for question and answers. I already saw some questions that I think are going to be answered within the PowerPoint, but we also are very excited to have like a lot of interactive conversations. So I am Susie, Kayana, Colin's here. Rodney, who's an exoneree himself, had a death in the family, so he's not able to be here. And Umar is out with the flu. So we are down two people, but we have, like I said, a mighty team with us today. And we're going to get going here. So I'm going to pass it along to Kayana.
Okay, so just a little bit about what we do. So the social work department serves as an immediate support for our clients, with really a focus on helping them to gain and maintain stability over the first year after release. And ultimately, our goal is to be a transition, a bridge to help them get connected with local resources within their community, and to also expand their support system, because we are based in New York and many of our clients are throughout the country. So during those first few months, we really work to find out what local organizations they could benefit from, connecting them with other members of the community. Sometimes we do connect them with local projects just so that they can work to expand the community of freed and exonerated people. The social work department provides trauma-informed care. That's at the center of everything that we do. Mental health counseling, as although we are not a clinical program, obviously we do have to provide like crisis intervention. For many of our clients, they're released and they don't have family or a support system. So we are really like working with them pretty intensely immediately after release, just to be that support for them, right? Financial counseling, I mentioned crisis intervention, and one of the main components that we do here is for our exonerated clients is administering the exoneree fund. And an overview of reentry services. So the services outside of the exoneree fund, we provide for all of our clients, regardless of whether they're exonerated or freed. So individualized case management, because although there is the shared experience of being wrongly convicted and incarcerated, everybody has individual needs. Check-in calls, like I mentioned, we check in almost daily, initially after release, and as time goes on, the idea is that those calls might lessen up, but for some of our clients, they do benefit from those regular check-ins. Helping them to obtain identification, linking them up to any benefits that they might be eligible for, housing search assistance, which is really, I would say, takes up a lot of time and is a major focus for us, because as you all know, trying to obtain housing when you have no credit history, you might not have any income at the time. And also for some of our clients, it still comes up on a background check. It can be very challenging. So a lot of our work is really advocating for our clients to get them housed. Connecting them with physical health needs. So primary care providers. We have lots of clients who come out with like complex medical issues that went unaddressed while they were incarcerated. So making sure that they're able to, get baseline lab work, and all the way up to more specialized care like neurologists and orthopedists and things along those lines. And we really push for all of our clients to be connected to mental health providers, although not everyone takes us up on that offer. Also, we help with employment, education. It's really based upon what our clients need. We arrange transportation to appointments, whether that's helping them figure out local public transportation or assigning Ubers and car services for them. We assist clients and prep them for speaking engagements, fundraisers, and other appearances. A big component of what we do is conference planning and assistance and logistics, and making sure all of our clients get there safely and have a great time at the conference. And then just ongoing support for various needs, emotional support. And then we also have a weekly Zoom support group for freed and exonerated people that Rodney runs. And then Umar and myself and Rodney also, and Colin, also do an in-person support group once a month here at the office.
Kayana, I'm sorry, if you could just briefly explain what the conference is for those who don't know.
Oh, sure. So the network conference is held every year, put together by the network support unit. And it's a space for freed, exonerated people, advocates, people that work in the field to come together over a 2-day period. And there's lots of workshops that speak to different needs. We generally host and facilitate a couple of workshops that are specifically for exonerated and freed people. And so that is a big part of building community for our exonerees and our freed folks. And they really look forward to participating in that yearly. And the next one will be coming up in New Orleans in March.
Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about trauma, the different types of trauma. And I'm sure all of us kind of have somewhat of an understanding of what trauma is. Experiencing a traumatic event can harm a person's sense of safety, sense of self, ability to regulate emotions and navigate relationships, as well as being hard to take feedback or, in other cases, pushback. And that's something that we see with every single exoneree, excuse me, and freed person in general. Everybody comes out and they have some sort of trauma on some level, and we'll get into the different levels of trauma right now. So we have 4 different main types of trauma. We have primary trauma, secondary trauma, vicarious trauma, and sanctuary trauma. So with each of us, we all in our own personal lives have at some point, most of us have had to deal with some type of traumatic event or something that has traumatized us. For our clients, they face trauma on all 4 of these levels. So on the primary level, it's where you're personally experiencing an event that poses a threat. And being incarcerated for a long period of time, it's almost impossible to avoid having some sort of primary trauma. And in addition to that, primary trauma in and of itself is the original incarceration, where you're getting arrested for a crime you have not committed, and on top of that, then being sent and being judged and having the stigma associated with that. For secondary trauma, it's being indirectly exposed to trauma by hearing a firsthand and vivid recounting of the trauma by the survivor, and expose and results in experiencing some of the same symptoms. So somebody who's incarcerated for an extremely long period of time is going to hear traumatic stories from others, is going to witness and feel those traumas. And that's something that affects them deeply and how they're able to maintain their relationships inside as well as when they're out. Vicarious trauma is evidenced in a more cerebral way where your worldview has changed. You might not even realize it. Becoming cynical and numb are some of the main symptomologies for that. And when you're arrested for a crime you haven't committed, and that's going to change your worldview while you're inside and when you're out, which is it gives you a sense of losing of safety overall, of not understanding the rules of what's happening in this world. And it can be really tough for a lot of people to be able to move through. And lastly, for sanctuary trauma, this occurs after you're experiencing a traumatic event and you expect support and you receive judgment or indifference. So in this case, right, somebody gets arrested for a crime they don't commit. And most of our clients, or I shouldn't say most, a lot of our clients maintain their innocence as for the entirety of their time while inside. And so while they're maintaining their innocence, they are being shunned by corrections officers, they're being shunned by other inmates, they're being shunned by family members, by the families of who the crime was actually perpetrated against. So there's so many different levels in which our exonerees and free people across the country are having to deal with, and having to deal with each level just kind of compounds on itself and makes reentry even more difficult. And each experience is an individual experience. So here are some of the examples of like the symptoms of traumatic stress. And so I'm just going to kind of highlight one in each group, and please feel free to read through and kind of think about what those all mean. So for emotional, one big point that is very, very common is anxiety. Everybody, is aware of what anxiety is. And anxiety for a freed person and an exonerated person has so many different levels to it, where they're anxious about what's going to happen next, anxious about time loss, anxious about interpersonal relationships. So there's so many different things, and each experience is different, but anxiety is something that we see is very common amongst this population. So for psychological, another thing that's very, very common in there is, questioning a worldview, questioning your own worldview. A lot of people change drastically from who they were before they were inside to afterwards. And a lot of that is due to some of the shock that comes from not understanding why it happened to them, not understanding, why would it be me? And that also kind of ties it as well to the spiritual side of things, anger at God, questioning worldview again. Many people who were religious beforehand or find religion while incarcerated don't understand why it would have happened to them. Many of our folks, had never been arrested for anything previously, or, had been in the country for a short amount of time. So it's understandable that they wouldn't that they could not come to grips with the fact that their entire life would be taken from them in an instant for something that they never even did. Behaviorally, I think one thing that is so common is sleep disturbances, where a lot of our clients have an extremely tough time being able to adjust to the environment of sleeping in the outside world. When you're incarcerated, depending on where you are and who you are, sleep can look different for a lot of people. Many of our clients rarely slept at all while there, constantly waking up throughout the night, having to be hyper vigilant constantly. And some people were in horrible conditions where people were sleeping on bed frames because they had no mattresses. Like, this will really affect you, even though you might be stepping outside and let's say you're staying at a family member's house and you have a nice bed or somewhere to stay, you don't even know what that feels like anymore. So for those folks, it's extremely tough to be able to navigate that once outside. For the physical side, one thing we also see very common is fatigue and exhaustion, and that can kind of also tie into the sleep issues. But fatigue and exhaustion of, let's say, 25 years of fighting for your innocence, that takes a lot out of a person. And to be able to then come outside and be thrust into the real world, that takes a lot just to be able to wake up and do what they need to do. So, it's really tough on a bunch of different levels. And all of these symptoms that you're seeing here, we've seen in one person or another. It's kind of like a pick and choose for each person, as each person has had a different experience while incarcerated. So here are some more examples of trauma exposure responses. So this is like kind of on our end as social workers. We're constantly hearing about trauma, working with trauma, working with clients, and that can affect us as well. So, I can speak for my experience, which is I started as an intern through a Master's of Social Work program. And for a lot of people, when they're going through their schooling, these are some of their first experiences working with clients. And when you come in and you're dealing with people who've spent 25 years, 30 years, 40 years incarcerated, and they're starting to open up, and you're utilizing your trauma-informed lens of making sure your language is intentional and making sure that you're thinking about your every single interaction you're having with a client, a lot of these can pop up. I mean, for myself, I would have fear or anxiety when it came to speaking with clients originally at first. Like, how am I supposed to respond and be diligent about my conversations with a person who's had a life experience I myself have never had and hopefully never will? Sleep disturbances, panic attacks, sense of persecution, all of these things can rub off on us when we're hearing about all these different types of trauma on a daily basis. So it's really important to have things like supervision, checking in with people who have been doing this work longer than you. And all of these things, it's important, as lawyers as well, right? Which is you're having experiences with clients while they're still incarcerated or while you're moving through the court process. These things are something that pop up for a lot of people, which is why it's so important to have, good coping skills, supervision, and understanding what your limitations are.
Okay, a big part of the work that we do is boundaries, right? So many of our clients are coming from, well, all of our clients are coming from a space where their boundaries were not respected, where they weren't safe, and where there were a lot of blurred boundaries in prison, right? So a lot of our work is helping them to learn how to navigate the world post release, and really, like, I don't want to say I'm modeling. I had to think of the word for a minute, but modeling what boundary work looks like, right? And we do that by just through our interactions with them, right? So that might look like, if it's not a crisis issue, like a frantic phone call, at 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock at night, and it's just a, hey, how are you doing type of phone call, we might not respond to that, or say, hi, it's midnight and we can follow up on this tomorrow morning, and just reinforcing like those little boundaries. And it's important because a lot of our clients struggle with the feeling of feeling indebted to us or to the organization for helping them prove their innocence and to get them out of prison. So, they might struggle with boundaries with themselves, like when it comes to speaking engagements or when it just comes to interactions with their family, because they're also struggling with, how do I work through all of this guilt of not being here for decades, and feeling like obligated to push their own feelings onto the back burner and really center the feelings of those around them and their support system. And for many of them, their support system is us, their legal team and folks like that. So boundary work is super important. And boundary issues occur when a professional establishes more than one relationship with clients or former clients, whether professional, social, or business. And these typically involve dual or multiple relationships. So obviously there's intimate contact and romantic relationships, personal gain, emotional and dependency issues, altruistic instincts, just feeling like, and a lot of us can struggle with these feelings ourselves, and wanting to do the best for our clients can sometimes blur our own boundaries. And that might mean giving them money out of our own pocket, in some instances, offering them a place to stay within our home, and then some things like sharing some parts of your personal life. Everybody's boundaries are different, right? But all of these things we need to take into account, that there is definitely a power dynamic when we're engaging with our clients, and that they might have trouble navigating those feelings themselves, because like I mentioned, a lot of them feel indebted and obligated to do the things that are requested of them, or to just not say no. And obviously a big part of them regaining control of their life is having autonomy over their decisions and making the decisions that are best for them.
Yeah, so we're just gonna show this little image here about boundary work. I think Kayana did a great job of explaining sort of some of the issues that come up in terms of like professional roles and dealing with what can be like obviously a monumental moment and experience for a lot of our clients, and how, just like Colin talked about the importance of seeing how intaking trauma can affect our own responses to the work, it's also really important to recognize how boundaries play a real part in helping the clients sort of process the experience and help them re-enter in like a really positive way in this world. So Kayana was mentioning, like, some people might feel obligated to use their own money or provide a couch to sleep on, or spending a lot of money on folks who may not have it, right? And on the surface of things, it feels like an altruistic action, but it can actually have like pretty long-term consequences. And in an effort to really model the behavior, like we mentioned earlier, in terms of how to have healthy relationships, boundary setting is I think of the utmost importance, right? So, obviously we're working with people who, like I said, have not had the luxury or the, frankly, like human right to have boundaries in such a long time, that it can feel confusing in that indebtedness that people sometimes feel to the people who have the power to help them get released and get exonerated and freed. And even for us as social workers who are helping people re-enter and get acclimated again. So this is sort of talking, it's like, several circles here, in terms of what's permeable and negotiable and what's impermeable and non-negotiable in terms of boundaries. So, obviously violence, discrimination, these things are sexual relations, absolutely not, right? These are like obvious ones that I think we're all like, of course. Now, when we talk to, for instance, law students or paralegals who do a lot of, first person contact with people who are still imprisoned, we often talk about the sort of semi-permeable boundaries of disclosure of personal details, for example. So we've had a paralegal who was talking to somebody who's still inside and is in threat of an execution, right? A very terrible situation. And that client, asked about pictures. Could they see pictures of this paralegal? Could they send them pictures themselves? And they have a relationship for years at this point, supporting them, helping the lawyer out, all these different things. And on the surface, you could say, what's wrong with that? That, he wants to see this person that he's speaking to, like the one line out for them, the one support. And on the surface, I think that's true. And then often what we don't think about what could happen is the projection of who that paralegal becomes for that client who is isolated, who has no control of their lives, who has very little outside contact. And they're in relationship with someone who is often young, is often a woman, is often very eager to have a happy dynamic between them. And this sometimes creates uncomfortable situations. And then that picture or those pictures can sometimes get into the wrong hands of the wrong people inside, right? And then this picture becomes, has its own leverage inside. And then this picture becomes something else that this paralegal had no control over. So there's lots of things to think about. That might be extreme in some circumstances, but that's definitely happened. And then, confidentiality is a must. Clear professional lines, all these things. Now, the food and drink, there's some circumstances, and for those social workers in the room, we can obviously talk about social work. I think lawyers, they have their own rules, right? But we often take people out to especially when once they're exonerated, there's a big celebration, there's a big meal, and there's tens of people there, and we're all celebrating, we're all having these very casual celebratory moments. And there are ways for that person in their first release to be like, these are my people, this is my new family. And that's true to a certain degree, except that there has to be a professional dynamic, because what happens when they're all up there on the mountaintop in that main moment, and then time lessens and they're less out of the spotlight, and they're hoping that those people are still there as much. So for us, we're really strict on boundaries. We want to be there for the person, we want to support them. And we also want to make sure, like kind of said, that we don't budge from these healthy boundary modeling, because they may think calling at 3 a.m. and having the person answer is like a normal expectation, when it's not, when it's a professional relationship. And frankly, some friendships may not want that either, but we're really like helping modeling that. So if that makes sense, we find that this is a really important aspect in terms of people resettling and re-entering in a really healthy manner, where they're learning about boundaries that will both help their relationship building, but help them keep a sense of safety that they're trying to rebuild again.
Yeah, Susie, if I can just jump
Yeah.
in, that's got to be hard, right? Like, it's got to be incredibly hard and require self-discipline. So, like, you're all compassionate people, you're all empathetic. I imagine this is why you're doing this work. I would hope everybody on this call is as well, but that seems an incredibly difficult thing to actually accomplish.
Well, I'll say this, and then I'd love for Kayana to jump in here, but I'll say, what I usually say is the first several months, at least 3 months, I call them like a thawing out period. And in my view, in my experience, it's like the folks have been in there in such a state of hypervigilance for decades, that they've been disconnected, and there's been a level of cognitive dissonance for so long, that to re-enter back in this world that has drastically changed in every sense of the word, there is this sort of undoing and then settling into a reality that's different, and finding a way to be safe in that new world. So that's when I actually think it's really important that we start to model that. So will we have much more context and conversation and connection in the first 3 months? Yes, we talk about that, especially the first month. I mean, there are less boundaries in terms of if they're having a panic attack, if they're really not settling in. That thing about the bed that Colin was talking about is so true. I mean, the amount of times we've bought beds for people, and they'll say, I can't sleep in that bed, it's actually too comfortable. Or I can't be in that room because there's a window and it's freaking me out, right? Or I need to know that I'm safe in this way. And this also bleeds into the context of who they are living with, if it's their family. the family not really understanding how to deal with this trauma, and that's a whole other thing that we try to
Right.
talk. So yes, so are they more permeable in the first couple months? Yes, but it's our job to sort of introduce this idea of boundaries and to show them that, you know, it doesn't mean we care less about you if we want to talk to you at 9 in the morning versus 9 at night, unless there's an urgent issue, right? And so usually, typically, people, and if they have a hard time with it, we talk about it. I don't know if you want to add, Kyle.
Yeah, Susie, you know, really touched on this, and the fact that, yes, we are, I always explain to people that this job requires a level of intimacy that I've never had in any other organization, considering the amount of access that the client has to you. Other orgs, it's been, these are my office hours, this is when I talk to you, you know, and outside of that, like, the boundaries are like very, very, there's a thick, bold line of boundaries, right? So for me in the beginning, it was, I would say it was refreshing, because you're able to really like have a holistic understanding of the person that you're working to support, and understanding like the real trauma and difficulties that this person has experienced, right? And that you are helping to undo a lot of that in all the interactions that you have. So yes, in the beginning, like Susie mentioned, we are talking to them multiple times a day. We're talking to them daily. You know, there are some clients who are able to really pick up on technology really, really quickly, and they'll want to FaceTime or they'll want to Zoom. But part of the work is understanding when you can kind of have like the more permeable boundaries with the client. And then when some clients really require like, I can't FaceTime with you because maybe the client wants to FaceTime you and they have like their shirt off or they're laying in the bed or something like that. So that's when you have the opportunity to really like reinforce those boundaries. And you're doing it with kindness and an understanding that they might not be aware of what they're doing, but there are some times when they do have a little bit of insight into what they're doing, and they're pushing to see what they can get away with. And that's why it really is up to us to understand, like, as much as I want to help this person, as much as I do care for this person, because we want to see our clients be successful and to you know, really create the life that they want to and are able to at this time. But understanding when we do have to really like pull back a little bit. And just also realizing that, you know, we're humans in this too, right? So taking the opportunity to talk things out in supervision, to talk things out in therapy, to see how, you know, we're being impacted by the work that we're doing. And also just knowing that we always have our clients' best interests in mind, and making sure that the things that we're doing, we're centering the client in those in the interactions and not centering ourselves and wanting to get some type of benefit out of these interactions, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And there's actually one more question on this topic, if you don't mind, in the chat. Nisa, do you want to just unmute and go ahead and ask?
Sure, it's just because this is something I've been struggling with a bit, just because of the close and long-standing relationship that I have with clients' family members. I'm in their homes often. I'm getting affidavits signed. And I was just at a family member's home, and they unexpectedly cooked me like a very large meal. And so I have never had these, you know, years-long relationships with clients' families in the way that I have in this current position. And I would just love sort of your thoughts on how to navigate not just the boundaries with clients, but also with family members who want to help and are grateful. And it's just something I'm struggling with personally.
I mean, I think we all should say something, but I think, you know, look, it's hard because there is an intimacy, like Kiana said, and like you're mentioning, that I too have never had in other work settings, and it's beautiful, and it's hard to negotiate. Now, something like a meal at their home, I've had that happen, and that feels like heartwarming and like a nice thing to break bread in that sense. And I personally just don't share like a ton of information about myself. So that's sort of where I keep my boundaries. So I'm very open to what's going on with them. And oftentimes, like I mentioned before, the work that we do involves the family. So especially if the client is living with a family member, and really we've been trying for a while, we have a curriculum to start a family and friends support group, because they really need their own forms of support. To really help them understand the dynamics of trauma and how it shows up and how it's affected them as well. They also are a recipient of this, right? For decades as well. So I would say I try to sort of, I mean, this is like a total social worker thing where you like turn back the questions often, right? And so you're sort of keeping in that field, which doesn't show, it's not dismissing it, but it's sort of keeping it back on the family, on the client in question. And it doesn't mean that you can't share anything, right? It's really about your comfort level. You know, you're not a robot. But I would say the topics are mostly kept about what's going on. And then there's also, you know, your own judgment, like what feels right and what doesn't. I think that that's really a big part of the ingredients. I don't know if Kiana and Colin want to add in.
Yeah, no, I was gonna say you have to trust yourself, and know that, you know, you might feel comfortable accepting a meal or sharing a meal with one family, but not necessarily the other family, and that's okay. So it's really about recognizing like where your comfort level is. But yes, you know, like the clients themselves who feel like indebted, or they want to show their appreciation to you, their families at times want to do the same thing. And you know, again, it's really up to us to figure out like what works for this particular set of clients might not work for the other client, because it might, especially if it's a client or a family that you might have had like a little boundary pushing, or like a little bit of blurred, or just things that might have occurred that made you feel uncomfortable, then that's definitely not where you would want to you know, be more accepting or open in regards to you know, what they're trying to offer. But there's nothing wrong with saying like, oh, okay, I'm comfortable with this situation and I'm not comfortable with this situation, right? And you know, I come from a space where my first job was, you don't accept any food, glass of water, which realistically, if you're sitting inside someone's home and you continuously turn down, you know, what they're offering you, you kind of seem like a jerk, you know what I mean? And like, how do you establish rapport, and especially when you know that it's going to be a long-standing relationship and that you might be asking things of them, but at the same time you're turning down their offer of a can of soda or of a meal that they prepared for you, you know what I mean? So it's like, in these situations I really had to gauge like, when does it make sense to break those rules, and recognizing when it's not beneficial to either of us, to myself or to them, to give in, even though I might feel a little jerky by saying no, you know what I mean? It's just looking at the bigger picture and recognizing how you feel in those moments.
Real quick, I was going to just add one thing for myself, which is that I've experienced with seeing clients in their home, and especially when family members are there, which is setting times, which is, I'm going to arrive at this time. I have a schedule that I'm going to have to do. I'm going to have to go somewhere else later. So like a lot of times families will talk about what needs to get spoken, like needs to get talked about. And then it gets to the next level where once that's out of the way, it becomes much more personal. Then it's like, oh, what, do you want to come with me here? What's the net? Like, what are you doing after this? And it's like, listen, this is when I'm going to be here, and this is when I'm going to have something else. Because as you know, I work with multiple clients, and you can kind of move it in that direction of giving yourself, I don't want to say a hard out, because sometimes, you know, things come up, paperwork takes longer. If you realize, oh, there's something else that I'm going to have to do. So setting yourself a time when you arrive and being like, this is, you know, I can be here for the next hour. I have another meeting afterwards, right? And even if there isn't one, it just allows you a space to be able to say, this is how much time I'm allotting here. And it gives you a way to get out without being rude by like saying, this is the pre-established time I spoke about. Like, now I have to go. That's one thing that I've also used when working with clients and their families in their home.
I know that Kia posted a question previously. Did we touch on that, answer it, or do you?
Absolutely. I mean,
Yeah.
I guess, I mean, I asked it because when I was at an Innocence Project, that was something that came up a lot, and especially in terms of that, you know, if there's emergency, if they're in an emergency situation, they're getting kicked out of their apartment or something where they need emergency funds, and it's sort of like, is there, and I wondered if you had a policy where you would provide up to a certain amount depending on the situation, and then it's like a one-time thing, or if there was, or if it was just like absolutely not for whatever reason. I know that there's the initial fund money that's available for everybody that comes out. And then I also wondered, is this a conversation that you're having with everybody after they're released? You sort of answered that, but yeah, that's what I was thinking when I asked that question. Thanks.
So, you know, I'll just say this, it's complicated because the fund that we have is for folks who have been exonerated, because when we say freed and exonerated, it's also we work with people who are never going to be exonerated but are freed. And those folks, unfortunately, do not receive the fund. So we have differing levels of what we can do for people, which isn't really equitable, but is what it is. And you know, we go through that fund usually in a year, and in addition to that access to that fund, we allow payment of a rent for a year. And obviously these things change the game for everybody who has access to it. It's a huge difference. However, as Kyan and I could talk about, there are people who've been out for a very long time who've gone through the fund, and we have found they were kept coming back for some sort of emergency. We then created the emergency fund, right? And on the face of it, it's a great idea, and I think, you know, we should have it, because the truth of the matter is most of us know, people have experienced this level of trauma for this long in their lives, which is a lot of people, half of their lives. It's not going to be smooth sailing once they're released, even with access to this fund. So there are like a fair amount of people who have to come back and access an emergency fund. So we have some loose rules around that, but it's very individually based. Now, if we see people like chronically needing to access it, that's something different. And there are going to be people who need to, because of their response to the trauma, because of their, you know, the where they are emotionally and mentally from this experience. No matter how much money we put forward, nothing is changing, right? And that's difficult for them first and foremost, but for us to deal with, right? How can we make this better for them? Is this going to get better for them, or is this their lot, right? So I don't know if that exactly answered. I don't know, Kyan, if you want to jump in there too, or Colin.
Yeah, no. You know, there's this idea that money solves problems, but you know, while it does afford you access to different things, it doesn't erase a lot of the trauma and the experiences that our clients have had. And while, you know, we do have boundaries, like a client can't come and say like, you know, I want to use my entire fund to purchase a vehicle. You know what I mean? Like we put a limit on how much they can spend. In regards to that, we also don't put money in their hand. Like if they have a request for something, they'll bring it to our attention and we'll figure out if it's doable. We'll, talk them through about why do you feel like this is necessary, things like that, just to try to get a understanding of it. And also in an attempt to not have them blow through this money in a very short amount of time, which is very possible. Like, I have clients that I've had for the entirety of the time that I've worked here, and they still have, after 3 years, they still have a little bit of money in their fund. And then there are clients who don't, just because they to them, and the struggle is that to them these things are a necessity. To them, it is an emergent need, you know what I mean? So sometimes it doesn't feel too great to have to deny a request, or to kind of put parameters, or say, I really don't think you need a $3,000 gift card to Macy's. What about a $700 or $1,000? You know what I mean? But the whole reason why we do this is because we do understand that it is a roller coaster after release. And someone can be doing really great, and then life happens, something comes up, and they're destabilized. So this is looked at as like a cushion and a financial support system for them. So I hope that helped to explain things a little bit more.
Yep. I was just about to put something in the chat, but I can just say it here. Just for lawyers, specifically defense lawyers, obviously every state's ethics rules are different, and you need to make sure you clear with your ethics rules whether you can provide direct financial assistance to a client or not. That's just something that you need to be aware of. Sorry, always need to jump in on the ethics issues.
No, for sure. I think you all know better, but I think it's like 4 or 5 states that allow you to provide any kind of financial assistance while you're still working with them in terms of. Okay, if that's okay now, we're gonna go into the scenarios. We have this activity. We're gonna split you into, you're gonna be assigned automatically, just bear with us as we do this, into different groups. And then we're gonna drop the questions in. And then and there's a Jamboard. I don't know, I'm assuming people have used a Jamboard. You just like press a sticky and put your responses in there, and then we'll give you 10 minutes and come back and discuss. Hopefully that makes sense to everybody. So just give us a second, and you're gonna end up showing up having to accept to be in a new group, and then we'll enter into that group and give you the questions, if that makes sense. Okay, so just bear with us a second.
You're not leaving us on our own, though. Y'all are going to be in one. Okay, just wanted to make sure.
Okay,
And Susie, I'll hang here to make sure folks get into the rooms if you need to go to. You go right ahead. So if folks are left here in the room, if you can hear this and need some help getting put into your assigned room, just speak up, let me know, or raise a hand, and I'll be happy to help.
All right, that totally didn't work, and that's my bad. We had all these setups. So what we're gonna do now, just because there isn't a ton of time, is that we're gonna go through some scenarios and just discuss them. Is everyone, not everyone is back at all? Okay. Everyone should be back now. Okay. All right, I'm just gonna go in now and yeah, and share the scenarios with you all so you can see what we're talking about. Okay. So,
Yeah, sorry about the technical difficulties, folks, on that.
I apologize for that. Okay. So we don't have a ton of time left, so I'm just gonna read through and then we can just get some reaction. So we obviously aren't using the real names of folks, but we wanted to give like a general scenario for people so that they can understand sort of what we're working with. So Maria is in her late 30s. She's originally from Mexico. She was released from prison after 17 years and was almost deported immediately to Mexico due to her undocumented status. With our advocacy, she remained in the US while under ICE supervision. She developed stage 4 kidney disease while in prison. She was arrested after a toddler she was watching choke to death. She gave birth to her second child, shackled while in prison, and he was immediately taken from her. To this day, Maria struggles to rehabilitate the relationship with her son and daughter and feels robbed of the role of mother. She struggles with anxiety and depression and keeping financially afloat, considering her inability to work. While we have been able to support her for years financially and with the effort to reconcile with her children, this remains a struggle. Recently, Maria was officially exonerated and married. She is now on a path to a green card. We are also currently supporting her to find a kidney donor and successfully receive a transplant. So we have lots of people who are in the sort of documentation limbo, right? Who were, either when they were arrested, had documentation that expired, or were undocumented to begin with. And so we've had a couple of people where they almost immediately were going to be deported upon release. She was one of them. And then we were able to keep her. But, then she was tracked by an ICE officer. There were lots of things that go along with it. We wanted to ask you all if you have other clients like this and what you would do to sort of help someone who can't really support themselves legally support themselves. And what would you do in terms of the loss that Maria is experiencing in terms of her relationship possibilities with her children? This is something, loss is something we deal with constantly. And grief is like a big aspect of people's experience in healing and processing what they went through. So, I would like to use the Jamboard here, but that doesn't seem to be working. So if you all want to just jump in and talk about maybe some experiences you've had with people who are undocumented, maybe some of the ways that grief and loss have come up in your work with clients, how you may have questions around that, how you've dealt with them personally. I know there's some social workers in the room as well. Because we really see that as the running theme throughout our work with people.
Hi, my name is Sade Taylor. I'm from the New England Innocence Project here in Boston, Massachusetts. I am the social service advocate. I also am the social service advocate for the Exonerate Network, which is our reentry support. So in this situation, I definitely believe that we would be inviting her to join. We have a couple of different things for that emotional support. So we have what is called a wellness retreat, which would give opportunity for her and her children to try to work through some of their issues should they desire to do that. We have programs such as Can We Talk, and also a support group on Zoom, sometimes in person, that she would be able to go to on her own just to be able to have some of those conversations. Um, and then just trying to see what kind of community resources that are available.
Great, thank you. Anybody else want to add in?
I have a question. This is Gail Pamikoff from Macomb County. In that situation where she developed stage 4 renal failure and she did not have, an established document status, how did you provide and or arrange for medical care?
She got emergency medical care, even being undocumented, through a special program in the state she was living in. So we were able to get her covered with that. And interestingly, she was on track to get a transplant, and then they denied her that because she was undocumented, couldn't prove financial independence, and couldn't provide the surety of someone being able to take care of her after that transplant. So, which is incredibly problematic on 1,000 levels and unfair to her. She's also very young. She's not even 40. So we've gone a different path, and this is the power of working in an organization that has lots of connections, where we're trying to get her a transplant at a major reputable hospital through connections, right? But not everybody has that.
No.
Yeah.
Wow.
Other questions?
I just wanted to also note that in states where they will provide medical care, providing additional financial assistance can sometimes complicate their eligibility for the medical care. It's a really complicated scenario.
Right, and that brings up a good point and kind of circles back to what we talked about when it comes to like finances solving problems for folks. And I think that that's the immediate knee-jerk reaction to when someone presents with a problem that can be resolved with money. It's kind of focusing on like the immediate need, but not really taking into consideration the long-term need. So we kind of had to refocus on how useful GoFundMes are in the long run, and especially for our clients who we know are not able to work and will be reliant on things like Social Security and public benefits, and clients who won't be compensated, right? So taking into account how, like, yes, $30,000 in a GoFundMe is amazing, but how does that impact them in the long term? So there's lots of things to take into consideration.
Okay, Colin, are you able to, we have one more scenario we want to try to get through.
Sure. Would you mind sharing your screen, Susie, so I can just read it off and they can look at it at the same time? Okay, so this is our next scenario moving into, and this one is about a client whose name is Nelson. Nelson is a 55-year-old man born in the Dominican Republic, whose primary language is Spanish, and who was released in October of 2022 after spending 26 years wrongfully incarcerated, but wasn't exonerated until May of this year. Nelson was exonerated after multiple lengthy court appearances in which the judge threatened to rescind parole and make Nelson serve the remainder of his sentence. This period was extremely difficult for Nelson, serving as a major source of anxiety for him until he was finally exonerated. Nelson has support from his family, namely his sister and his daughter. Nelson's relationship with his mother and his daughter have been tumultuous. Nelson's mother has dementia, and Nelson does not fully understand the complexities of her condition and therefore resents when she is unkind to him. He and his daughter have had issues regarding role identity. His daughter feels as though he should be working harder to maintain a relationship with her amicably, while Nelson feels as though she should be respecting him more as her father and feels as though she does not appreciate that he was incarcerated for something he did not do, and that's why he wasn't able to be in the fatherly role that she wanted. Nelson is anxious to continue to grow and move forward in his reentry progress. It can be very difficult to help Nelson with things like gaining identification, getting him to appointments on time, and disregarding previously made agreements, which can and have led to issues in regards to his needs. To obtain U.S. documentation, Nelson needed to fix the misspelling of his name and incorrect birthday on his documentation from the Dominican Republic. This was an extremely long process, which included multiple visits to his consulate, the DMV, and other government institutions. Gaining updated identification is usually one of the first functions the social work team provides for clients. So having it be such a long process was very stressful and bothersome for him. And kind of what we were thinking about this one, about when we're looking at the totality of what Nelson is going through, like, how do the multiple different identities, intersecting identities, how do they play a role in how successful his reentry progress is? Because everybody has different timelines for what that would be for them. So how do you guys think that his identity or multiple identities could play a role in how successful his reentry progress is?
I don't know about everybody else, but I'm kind of like just trying to work through all of that.
Yeah.
Right? In my head, like in like kind of a checklist. Where do I go first to try to, which is the most pressing need?
Right.
I think is in terms of trying to assess that. I would get, and then what can we actually do about it is the second question.
Right. So then I guess kind of jumping off what you're saying too, to kind of rephrase it a little bit as well, which is, what would you, all of you in your positions, what would be the first need that you would try and assess with Nelson? Like, what would be the most important thing immediately after coming home? Would it be documentation? Would it be relationships with his family, with his daughter? What do you think?
This is Lorna McCluskey. I would think getting him in trauma therapy, because I don't know how you'd get all those different identities integrated, because I think they'd have to integrate at some point so that he can effectively deal with all the different issues coming at him. Because I think when you're locked up like that, you just, I don't know, I think in his head he'd have to funnel things to even begin to handle them, and it'd be funneled by all the different identities going on. I'm a dad right now. Well, I'm a dad who's being rejected right now. I'm a guy who's looking for a job right now. I think he would need help, a lot to help, and I think that would what I would want to see on the front end.
Right, definitely. And I think that's something too that, we've had experiences where clients come out and they're very open to that. And then we have others who, although on our end, it seems apparent that they would need some kind of trauma counseling or a therapist or something along those lines, they reject it and they don't want to do it. So in Nelson's case, Nelson was actually open to doing that. And again, one of the issues that we were running into early on was not going to appointments, being late to appointments, needing assistance getting there, but not being able to respond to to car services, to Ubers. So, I think you're exactly right, which is trauma counseling and being able to navigate those multiple identities and, work through that with somebody is important. And then also, how do we get him there if he's not helping us do that? So he was one of those cases that was open to it, but it can be hard to get him in the room with that person, if that makes sense. Does anybody else have anything they want to add?
I want to actually add before, because we only have a couple more minutes, that part of what we're also talking about is his various identities as a Dominican man, as a primarily Spanish speaker, as someone who is now, middle-aged, he went in very young, as someone who takes a lot of pride in being able to provide for his family. We see this a lot with a lot of people coming back out, that was another thing that was robbed and taken from them, the ability to provide for their family, especially in sort of a traditional role that they might inhabit. So I think you all, in working with our clients, we always want to think about our positionality, who we are, our identities, and how they interact with the clients themselves, right? So it's not just somebody who's been in prison for decades. In this case, it's a Dominican man who actually had documentation, but wasn't honored when he first was released, and was almost deported despite having a green card that wouldn't have gone expired had he not been wrongfully imprisoned. So all these complications, right, and how he's perceived in this world when he walks around, whether or not they know that he was in prison, and whether or not they know he was actually exonerated and innocent of the crime. So I just want to end on that note, that we have to always think about everyone's multiple intersecting identities, how they interact with our positionality, especially in the professional role that we're in, and what is created in the room, in the moment, in the work together. If that all makes sense. Kayan, go ahead.
And I just want to add that sometimes there are issues that clients present with that they're always going to have, despite our best efforts. And it's not about solving the problems, but providing them with the supports, right? And navigating them, because the trauma that the families feel from decades of incarceration are not things that will be resolved in 2 sessions of therapy, or even 20 sessions of therapy. You know what I mean? Immigration issues can be long-standing issues. So it's okay when we're presented with problems that aren't an easy fix and might take years and years and years to come to a resolution. So I think that that's also something to keep in mind in the work that we do. Like, it's not we can't just flip a switch and, exoneration is usually like the first step in getting to resolving and working towards resolving some of these issues. It's not like immediate. And I think sometimes that's hard for us to, reconcile with that. It's a great day, but then our clients are faced with all these ongoing challenges and obstacles that are outside of their control. And despite our best efforts, we can't resolve for them.
Thank you all. We apologize for the technical. I really was hoping that was going to be fun, but we were able to talk a bit. So thank you for your patience.
And absolutely no apologies necessary. Of course, we're so grateful, all of you, for your time. I know that, speaking for myself, you just brought so many more dimensions to some of these questions, and just very, very grateful for all of your time. And for folks, so I did launch the post-evaluation poll. Please complete that before signing out. I'm going to just put in a plug for next month's seminar, which will be in January. I'm looking at Kia Hayes will be running that with an affiliated faculty member here from Penn, Charles Loeffler. They'll be talking about their work and evaluating the work between CIUs and innocence organizations, some of the lessons that they've learned from collaborative relationships, what works, what doesn't, and where we kind of think they're headed. But once again, please everybody join me in thanking the staff from the Innocence Project for your time. We're so grateful for everything you've given us. We did record this session. However, at least for the time being, we will not be posting it on the public convictionreview.net website, but we will be making it available to people, and I'll send that out when it's available. So once again, thank you everybody, and thank you especially Kayana and Susie and Colin for your time. We're very grateful for everything you brought to us. Thanks everyone.
Have a good day.
Thank you, everybody.